Sometimes the hardest part of following God isn't the path itself. It's knowing if the voice we're hearing is truly His. We crave direction, long for clarity, and yet we hesitate, wondering, is this God speaking, or is it just my own fear, my ego, my wishful thinking? It's a question every honest believer wrestles with at some point, because not every thought that feels urgent is from God. Not every open door is divine, and not every emotion means you're being led. Discernment doesn't come from volume or drama. It comes from stillness, from a relationship that's deep enough to recognize His tone. God's voice will never contradict His character. He won't rush you into panic. He won't flatter your pride. He won't lead you into something that robs your peace or dims His light in you. His voice is gentle but firm, comforting but convicting, loving even when it's challenging. And if you're not sure, it's okay. God is patient. He's not offended by your uncertainty. In fact, He often uses your questioning as the very tool to draw you closer, not further away. The voice of God doesn't need to shout to be real. In fact, it's often quiet, so quiet that it requires us to turn down the volume of everything else. Fear screams, ego insists, but God whispers. He invites. He doesn't manipulate with guilt or pressure. He waits for us in the quiet, knowing that real faith listens before it moves. So how do you tell the difference? Start here. God's voice brings peace, not confusion. Even when the message is hard, even when the calling is uncomfortable, His peace comes with it. Not the kind of peace that makes everything easy, but the kind that anchors you when nothing makes sense. The ego will always push you toward self-protection or self-promotion. Fear will freeze you or rush you. But God calls you to surrender. He calls you to trust. And His voice often aligns with obedience, not comfort. That's how you'll know. It'll ask for something deeper. Not applause, but sacrifice. Not applause, but trust. That's not how fear speaks. That's how love speaks. And God is love. Sometimes we want God's voice to confirm what we already want. We want Him to validate our plans, our timing, our desires. But God's voice isn't there to echo our ego. It's there to lead us into truth. And truth often confronts us before it comforts us. One sign it's really God: it humbles you. It calls you to look inward with honesty, not just outward with ambition. When God speaks, He doesn't inflate your pride. He refines your heart. His voice doesn't flatter, it forms. You might hear a prompting that doesn't make you feel powerful, but calls you to serve. You might feel drawn to something that stretches you past your comfort. That's not your ego, that's your shepherd. He doesn't shout over your will, but He won't compete with it either. That's why the clearer you want His voice to be, the more surrendered your posture needs to become. The less you need to be right, the more open you'll be to hear what's true. The voice of God leads you toward peace, but not always toward ease. Sometimes what God says will challenge everything comfortable in your life, but it will never lead you into chaos, contradiction, or prideful ambition. His voice convicts, but never condemns. It corrects, but never confuses. It brings clarity in the storm, not more noise. When it's God, there's a stillness that follows, even if the message is hard. Your ego might say, act now, prove yourself, show them. But God often says, be still, wait, trust me. Your fear might whisper, what if it all falls apart? But God quietly reminds, even if it does, I'm still with you. That's how you know. Fear speaks in panic, ego in pressure, but God speaks in peace. So if you're discerning His voice, Don't just ask what you heard, ask how it made you feel. Did it draw you closer to Him, or just deeper into yourself? Sometimes God's voice won't tell you what you want to hear, but it will always tell you what you need to hear. He speaks truth, not flattery. His words won't always validate your plans or soothe your pride. They'll invite you into surrender, humility, and courage. Often, His guidance calls you away from shortcuts and easy wins and toward depth, integrity, and patience. So when you're trying to discern whether it's Him, ask, does this word invite me to trust more, to love more, to let go of control? God's voice won't puff you up. It'll break you open, gently, not to harm you, but to heal what fear and ego have built around your heart. Sometimes it comes as a nudge you can't shake. Sometimes it's a verse that won't leave you alone. Sometimes it's the still silence that says, "Stay with me." You don't need to force it. When it's Him, the message won't need to be loud. It'll go deep. The more you walk with God, the more familiar His voice becomes. Not because it always sounds the same, but because it always leads you back to Him. Over time, you'll notice a pattern. His voice builds peace, not panic. It calls you higher, not inward. It leads to transformation, not just temporary relief. When it's fear, you feel rushed. When it's ego, you feel inflated. But when it's God, you feel steady, even if what He says is hard. You feel convicted, but not condemned. You feel held, even when you're called out. Don't let doubt make you silent. Keep listening. Keep checking your heart. Keep returning to the Word. God still speaks, and His voice is available to those who are willing to be still, to be honest, and to follow. Even when you're unsure, He's patient. He trains your ears as you trust. And in time, you'll come to know that the shepherd's voice doesn't just give direction, it gives life.